45 years ago, we crashed over Mississippi after running out of fuel on our route to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Some artists become famous for their work, but others for their stories. Former Lynyrd Skynyrd drummer Artimus Pyle was fierce. Renowned Southern rock band that made Sweet Home Alabama and Free Bird classics. Pyle performed with musical power and a wild, unsure energy, as if every concert was a battle for survival, with long hair, brilliant eyes, and a Southern soul drumming technique. His biggest battle wasn't in the studio or on stage. On a dark night in 1977, the band's jet crashed into Mississippi's thick woods, killing his closest bandmates. Artimus crawled from the wreckage and dragged himself through miles of darkness to call for help, despite shattered ribs and blood. He stopped becoming a drummer. He was the sole survivor of Skynyrd's heartbreaking fall. But survival was just the start. In the decades that followed, Artimus Pyle would suffer another wound, this time from charges that turned the world against him. Once in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and revered by audiences, he would be forced into the industry shadows, where one accusation may destroy a reputation. This story is not about guilt or innocence. This is the story of a man who lived in the gray region between light and darkness, where music was not just a passion but the only means to not be forgotten. Ever listen to Free Bird? Then learn about the man who kept time for that song with blood, tears, and irreparable things. Early life. Artimus was born Thomas Delmer Pyle in Louisville, Kentucky, on July 15, 1948. His father, Clarence Del Pyle, received the Purple Heart for courage in World War II. He subsequently said the family's working-class upbringing of discipline, nature, and mechanical noise gave him beat in my heart. Artimus grew up among wild horses, machines, and farms. He learned to ride bareback with his grandparents in Tennessee and fell badly aged 7. However, he first heard the world's rhythms in rural seclusion. Artimus realized the engine's constant hum could be music while riding his grandfather's bulldozer. When machines became a heartbeat, the boy fell in love with drums. His mother Mildred handed him bongos at 9. He got an ancient Slingerland drum equipment from his father aged 12. It was his only never-forgotten present. Young Artimus started drumming because it was the only way to survive in a harsh environment. His family moved to Columbus, Ohio, during high school. He graduated from Eastmore High in 1966. He played in various student bands in his teens, recognized for his crazy flair and instinctive rhythm. Friends called him Artimus because of his baby face and ferocious drumming, a mythical name that resonated with him forever. As the Vietnam War escalated, he joined the Marine Corps in 1968. He became an aircraft ordnance technician and sergeant after 3 years of discipline, hardship, and service. He returned from the military in 1971 with drumsticks and a vow, not a weapon. Musical survival was possible if he survived the battlefield. A childhood without splendor or epic tragedy was filled with loneliness, structure, survival instinct, and a peculiar, continuous sound. Boy who always felt different's first drumming. Perhaps that prepared him for a life no one else could have experienced. Early career Artimus Pyle left the military in the early 1970s without a plan. He knew one thing. He must play drums. He played little pubs in Florida and temporary stages at local festivals because he couldn't do anything else. During those restless years, he joined various bands around the American South, but none had the name or momentum to raise him out of obscurity until fate reached him unexpectedly. Bob Burns, Lynyrd Skynyrd's drummer and co-founder, resigned in 1974. Burned out as the band rose to stardom. Skynyrd was in turmoil as they prepared their third album, Nothing Fancy. They needed a drummer who was technically skilled, tough enough to survive constant touring, and crazy enough to understand Southern rock. Charlie Daniels, a veteran musician and Ronnie Van Zant friend, introduced Artimus. Pyle performed so forcefully at an informal audition that the studio became silent. No need for lengthy discussions. "I don't need a drummer," Ronnie remarked, looking at him. Artimus Pyle joined Lynyrd Skynyrd, one of his most life-changing decisions. From his 1975 Nothing Fancy debut, Pyle brought unique energy. Pop and heavy rock drumming weren't his style. It had the South's rhythm, like wheels on dusty back roads, and a heartbeat that knows it's doing something hazardous but can't stop. Skynyrd became more explosive, raw, and steady with him behind the kit. After that, the band reached its peak, and Artimus Pyle, a former Marine, became an essential part of America's rock sound. But he never forgot his roots. He donned his worn-out military boots backstage at Madison Square Garden. A gentle reminder that glory and damnation are closer than we realize. Nobody knew that better than him. Career success? From 1974 to 1977, Lynyrd Skynyrd and Artimus Pyle reached their height. Like Artimus drumming, the band's hit albums Nothing Fancy, Gimme Back My Bullets, One More from the Road, and Street Survivors captivated millions with explosive Southern rock, brutal lyrics and a dirty yet noble sound. He didn't like flamboyant solos as a drummer. Artimus drummed urgently, rough-edged, but never odd, like a story. His drumming in Saturday Night Special evoked tragedy. Gimme 3 Steps sped like a real getaway. His presence made Skynyrd tighter, more alive, and no longer a Southern band, but an American working-class icon. Artimus was spontaneous and uncensored backstage, arguing with management face-to-face or wandering miles during a tour to visit a small town. He played music with unnerving precision and discipline. Van Zandt claimed he plays every song like his last. 1977 brought a new album, tour, and unexpected finale. While flying to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the band's Convair CV-240 crashed into Gillsburg, Mississippi's swampy woods on October 20, 1977. Skynyrd lost his career, friendship, and future in that little instant between air and earth. Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, Cassie Gaines, and 3 crew members died instantly. Artimus Pyle stood up after being flung from the wreckage with 3 fractured ribs and blood on his chest. After crawling 400 meters through heavy forest, he reached a farmhouse for help. The homeowner panicked at seeing a bleeding guy stumble out of the dark and fired a warning shot, but Artimus didn't stop. He shouted, "A jet crashed. They're all dying." One of the most terrifying symbols of American rock was Artimus Pyle, bleeding, staggering into the night, insects swarming, bodies behind him. That collision took part of him, along with the music, friendships, and mad, glorious years that were permanently buried in that forest. After the fall, music changed forever. From his worst moment, Artimus Pyle emerged as the last living custodian of Skynyrd's sacred commitment to continue narrating the story they never got to finish. Year after crash aftermath. Artimus Pyle did not perform again after the 1977 plane accident, as America mourned Ronnie Van Zant and the bandmates. He silently left. 3 years after the disaster, he studied at a Jewish yeshiva in Israel. He didn't play drums or talk music then. Pyle didn't pause. It allowed survival anew. He founded the Southern-inspired Artimus Pyle Band APB in the early 1980s after returning to the U.S. Not showy or market-driven, APB was an extension of Skynyrd, not for glory, but to honor the music he nearly lost. Lynyrd Skynyrd's 1987 reunion tour included Pyle, although it lasted barely a few years. He left due to quiet arguments, unhealed wounds, and feeling ignored. After such a hard fall, life should provide him comfort. Then something worse happened than the crash. Artimus Pyle was accused of sexually molesting his ex-girlfriend's stepdaughters in 1993. The information was released in Florida. He was charged with attempted capital sexual battery, a serious U.S. offense. If found guilty, he faced life in prison. Pyle denied it fully. He labeled it a resentment-fueled effort to ruin his reputation. The prospect of losing everything led him to accept a no-contest plea deal, meaning he didn't acknowledge guilt but didn't dispute the punishment. The result? 8 years of probation and sex offender registration followed. From there, everything fell apart. Many shows canceled. Radio stopped playing his free bird-related tracks. It only caused suspicion and controversy. Artimus Pyle went from survivor to disappointment for some. He was arrested again in November 2007 for failing to update his sex offender register address, a requirement in several jurisdictions. He spoke out this time. He faced the courts like a drummer holding a band together in a storm. The court acquitted him 2 years later. A verdict doesn't repair a reputation. He was renowned for the 1977 disaster, but also for his nearly 2 decades as a sex offender. Pyle and APB continued touring and recording incognito. He wrote, shared stories, and cried when talking about Ronnie Van Zant. However, the former hero had lost popularity. Festivals denied. Several fans petitioned to cancel shows. Some venues post signs. "We reject sex offenders." He recounted the full tragedy in Street Survivors, the genuine tale of the Lynyrd Skynyrd plane crash, in 2020 to recover the voice silenced by scandal. Even if he said it many times, the truth never felt powerful enough to dispel the doubt. Some see Artimus as the hero who climbed out of ruins to call for rescue. Others know him as the man who never went to court to prove his innocence with a not guilty verdict. Perhaps in his heart, there have always been 2 men, the drummer who saved the band and the man the world turned its back on. Personal life. If Artimus Pyle's musical life was a trip over burning stages and broken moments, his personal life was a symphony, quiet, intense, and mainly ununderstood. Artimus married young and had 5 children, although his marriages were always private. His 1977 plane tragedy trauma caused him to withdraw. Focusing on his children and avoiding the entertainment industry, he lived alone in the North Carolina mountains for a while, gardening, riding horses, and rebuilding old mechanical equipment, as if he sought a life no one could speak about and nothing to prove. Despite being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Artimus was a vegetarian. To avoid reliving the past, he advocated nature, meditation, and simplicity. He never concealed his grief. My reputation, trust, and greatest years were lost along with my pals. I don't want forgiveness. Human existence is all I seek. Artimus kept his children close via acts, not words. He took them on tour to show them a musician's life. He didn't teach them rock or living. After the world turns against you, he taught them to stand. He learned that via blood and tears. However, the 1993 affair hampered his personal life. His family suffered from his long-time sex offender registry listing. Some relatives distanced themselves, some old acquaintances stopped calling, and he rarely spoke about his private life in interviews, not out of avoidance but because, as he stated, fewer words, less suffering. Artimus' patience seemed most amazing in private. Never sought popularity or appeared in the media to explain his innocence. Just kept playing drums. If each beat were a sigh, a modest gesture of self-forgiveness, and a gentle reminder, I'm still here, whether you remember me or not. In a world where scandal can devour everything, Artimus Pyle chose to live quietly, not because he had nothing to say, but because in the end, he knew what truly remained were the people still willing to listen. Legacy and influence. Though Artimus Pyle's life was divided between musical glory and personal scandal, no one can deny. His drumming helped shape the soul of Lynyrd Skynyrd, and more broadly, an essential chapter in the history of Southern rock. Pyle wasn't Skynyrd's original drummer, but he was the one who elevated the band's rhythm to new heights. His arrival, starting with the Nothin' Fancy album, marked a surge in Skynyrd's technical brilliance and live energy, especially in epic performances like Free Bird and Working for MCA. Unlike many drummers of the era who simply laid a foundation, Pyle made the drums a character of their own, leading, conversing, and sometimes standing out more than the guitar during peak moments. His influence went beyond the music. The image of Artimus Pyle, bloodied, crawling from the wreckage, became a symbol of survival, a rare testament to unbreakable spirit in rock history. Most crash survivors don't want to revisit the trauma, but Pyle did the opposite. He spoke, he wrote, he turned memory into film. Street Survivors, the true story of the Lynyrd Skynyrd plane crash, as if only truth could keep the souls of his fallen bandmates alive for today's audiences. To younger generations of drummers, he's not a model of ultimate technique, but of authenticity. Southern musicians, from indie bands in Georgia to old-school rockers in Texas, still mention Artimus as a firekeeper, someone who never needed the spotlight to survive, only the chance to drum for the right people at the right time. In 2006, Artimus Pyle was honored with the other members of Lynyrd Skynyrd at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a late but well-earned recognition. Though rarely seen in the media, Pyle continued to contribute quietly, from memorial projects for his former band to ensuring that the spirit of Free Bird wasn't forgotten in an era ruled by auto-tune and manufactured hits. His legacy doesn't live on charts or in records spun millions of times. It lives in that moment when you hear a drum beat echoing from afar, simple, maybe, but enough to make you stop and listen one more time. Artimus Pyle may never be forgiven by everyone, but in the history of Southern rock, he's left behind a silent line, long, deep, and impossible to erase. Present life at 76, Artimus Pyle doesn't live in the glow of past glory, nor does he hide from public scrutiny. He has chosen a path few dare to take, to keep performing, to keep telling the story that was never fully told, and to do it all in silence, through the rhythm of drums rather than words. The year 2024 marked a new and determined chapter in his long journey. Artimus Pyle released the album Anthems, honoring the music of Lynyrd Skynyrd, where he collaborated with legendary artists like Dolly Parton, Sammy Hagar, and Billy Ray Cyrus to reimagine the iconic songs that made Skynyrd famous. His voice isn't heard in the vocals, but every drumbeat and every groove carries his unmistakable mark, as if to say, I'm still here. I'm still part of that legacy. Not stopping in the studio, he continued touring across the U.S. with the Artimus Pyle Band, performing on dozens of stages from New York to Florida. These shows had no pyrotechnics, no media frenzy, but they had loyal fans. The eyes of people who had grown old alongside Free Bird, and those who stood for hours just to catch a pair of drumsticks thrown from the stage. At one 2024 show, an elderly fan recalled, Artimus came out after Free Bird, looked at me, and handed me his sticks. He didn't say a word, but his eyes said everything. In 2025, he continues to tour. His schedule includes special stops like the Rock, Ribs and Ridges Festival, New Jersey, Adirondack Vet Fest, New York, and music venues across Texas, Florida, New Hampshire. Notably, he's returned to radio stations to talk about his journey through scandal, the truth behind the plane crash, and most importantly, why he never gave up on music. Artimus now lives in Asheville, North Carolina, where he tends his own garden, rides horses, fixes motorcycles, and leads a life without social media, without noise, without explaining himself. He once said, it wasn't a statement for effect. It was the declaration of a man who had once been celebrated, once cast out, and now chooses to exist, through rhythm, through quiet, through unshakable loyalty to music and to those he lost. In a world where many legends choose to retreat, Artimus Pyle still stands on stage, not to remind people who he once was, but to affirm that even though he fell with that plane long ago, he rose up again and kept playing the rest of the song. Not to be forgiven, but not to be forgotten. Artimus Pyle was never just a drummer. He is one of the clearest reflections of what rock truly is. Part glory, part darkness. A man who emerged from the hellish woods of the 1977 plane crash with bloodied legs and 3 broken ribs, yet still forced himself to crawl for help. A man once celebrated as a hero, then dragged into the abyss by accusations no one wanted to face. A man who never denied his past, but never tried to paint over the present either. If you only remember him as the ferocious drummer of Lynyrd Skynyrd, you know just half the story. If you only know him from lawsuits and probation, you also know just half. The whole of Artimus Pyle lies somewhere unnamed, between memory and judgment, between the things he did and the things he could never wash away. Surviving that crash was once called a miracle, but living on after it, living with doubt, living with a past that never closed, was what truly tested his soul. A soul not flawless, but unshakably steadfast. The real question isn't just for him. It's for all of us. Should we remember him as the man who crawled from wreckage to save his bandmates, or as someone once branded a monster? Maybe in the world of rock, no one is purely a hero or purely a villain. If you ever loved Skynyrd, if you've ever heard Freebird during a moment in your life, try listening to it again. This time, not just with your ears, but with your heart. And when the drums kick in, you'll know. Whoever Artimus Pyle is to you, whether you forgive him or not, he's still keeping time for a part of your memory that we all once belonged to. What do you think about him? Leave a comment below. Because in rock, the most frightening thing isn't being judged, it's being forgotten.